In today's Gospel, we see how the new lawgiver writes. We have two forms of the verb writing coming in, katagraphein and simply graphein. One could actually mean drawing in the sand, but he is said to be writing with the other verb and with his finger, and that has an echo of the finger of God writing the Ten Commandments. The Logos, the second person of the Trinity, gave us the law. He also wrote the laws of creation. The cosmos came from God. Let there be light, let there be the world, and we have that world from him, complete with the instructions for use. We have the way in which we are to use it, and therefore we have in the incarnate Son of God the authentic interpreter. There is a parallel between this scene and the giving of the law on the Mount of Beatitudes. We have that same lawgiver giving us the authentic interpretation. You have said, or rather you have heard it said by those of old, and then we have the command, but I say unto you, and he gives the authentic interpretation. The Gospel takes us a stage further. We have the fullness of the divine pedagogy, and that also continues, for he gave us the Holy Spirit, who would lead us into all truth, and therefore that truth is given to us as time goes on in its, as it were, complete self-understanding by the Church itself, the bride of Christ. We have this living organism or organ of teaching, the magisterium, guided by that Holy Spirit. And so we have no excuse. In this year of mercy, we are invited to look at scenes of this nature, to see the merciful interpretation. Epikeia is a word used in the East, as is economia. They give us a notion of the clemency of God, and we are expressions of that. We meet people where they are. We are on side, as is Christ, the Good Shepherd. And so it is with regard to this inverted commas sinner before him. We actually do see what the Lord would do and what he does do. He puts us in our own truth, and that disarms, that takes away hypocrisy. We are not without elements of that fault ourselves, and probably those men, because they would have been men going to throw these stones, were aware of the sins of purity they would have committed, perhaps in secret. We, if we're honest, are all miserable and all beggars for mercy. And that is our truth before our brethren too. We have no right to stand over them and to start throwing stones. It is something that we're fairly good at, actually, even in our Christian dialogue. We love to make recreation out of some form of throwing stones. It is not the best use that we can make of our tongue. It would be better to use it mercifully. And when we hear people being stoned in conversation, do we indulge, or do we actually pull out some element which collocates things in a wider spectrum? Paul has been talking about his privileges, as it were, as a practicing Jew. He was formed by Pharisees. He was taught at the feet of Gamaliel. And then he was shown the fullness actually in a fulminating way. And he considered all that he had a right to as so much zimia, so much loss, so much rubbish. It can even be translated as so much dung. And the Hebrews do actually write quite concretely, strong language. This was what Christ was to him. All was loss, but all was gain. And he was inviting people to press on, and also to be athletics in this pressing on. There was an oomph in the air. There was a pressing on which actually was taken very seriously by the first generations. We have the white martyrdom of the desert, the martyrs, that is, of austerity in the Egyptian and Palestinian or Syrian desert, who actually, not being martyred physically, martyred their will and also their body. There was this heroicity, this heroism of virtue in the early centuries. They were pressing on towards the mark, knowing that they only had one short innings. And then when it came to the Constantinian peace, when after the Edict of Milan in 313 things were more peaceful, then it became too easy. And the oomph, to some extent, was lost by the socialization of Christianity. And so it was that there was an impetus to go further. Hence we had this early religious life coming in. We too need to keep that oomph, the freshness of the explosion of Christianity. We notice that in the reading from the Old Testament and in the psalm which is linked to it, there is a hope of coming through that desert, coming back from exile, and that is what our condition on earth is. We can't be too comfortable here. We don't belong here. We are pressing towards the goal, which is beyond time and space. And so in this Lent it is important that the eyes be raised towards what we're here for. I conclude, there is an element of treating well the misery and pain that we're next to. That woman caught had no hope. We can imagine the power of that scene when all had gone away and dropped their stones, and eventually the Lord looked up into her eyes, and she looked back and saw for the first time mercy. She had hope, and whereas she shouldn't be there, she should be a heap of wounds and blood, she was given this new life, however, with instructions for use. Do not sin again. And that bit is important in the ministry of mercy. We can't encourage sin or give the impression that it doesn't matter. Mercy has sense only in the context of misery. We have no right over mercy, and mercy is mercy precisely because we have no right over it. To go a stage further and to treat mercy as something over which we have a right and then to abuse it is unfortunately to play the game of the enemy and misuse grace and become hardened in our heart.